No army, as in the book, no battle, no lords to bend and banners to raise, tripping gods would ayahuasca. So after the first episode of Visions, and the second, and the third, do you know how to muster an army? Do you know how oaths work? Mamma mia. Make no mistake, in the book, Daemon was responsible for a great part of Rhaenyra's early success. Let's read this passage from the book. They rose up all along the rivers, knights and men-at-arms and humble peasants, who yet remembered the realm's delight. A note, by the way, the argument between him and Rhaenyra was probably one of my favorite scenes in the entire saga. This is when a certain device is tropified, it starts getting copied not only just too much, but also by people who don't have the skill or understanding to use it correctly. Companionship and support. The fear and envy Daemon insists that people feel when they find themselves in the shadow of his greatness.
Your father was a coward who knew I was the stronger son, that I was the leader of men, and he was afraid to be seen in my shadow.
Flashbacks at least actually happen, so they're constrained by some level of believable, backstory. This is just pure symbolism. Might as well paint 6 paintings and call them Daemon's Germany. As a side note, the first part of this video will focus primarily on Daemon and the writing flaws that so diminish him. This was kind of the first script I had in mind, and the second, we'll broaden this to the entire season and observe how many of these flaws carry into the other character lines, storylines. I do have another script coming, focused primarily on world building, and the need for respecting an author's understanding of his world. That matter deals with adaptation and writing more broadly, however, so I thought I'd keep this one focused on the show, and the other one a bit more broad. They are crippling our boy Daemon. What has gone wrong? What was arguably the greatest portrayal of the entire show has passed from confusing to frustrating to nothing. It's just an apathetic trudge at this point. Well, I mean, there's that one rousing moment in the finale, but they didn't earn it. This is a study in cultivating disinterest. It's a study in how to destroy an entire season's worth of nuance and charisma, built atop what was a more shallowly ruthless character in the book. He was Martin's favorite. He had some romance, had some charisma, had friends in the City Watch, but he was still pretty ruthless in the book. Given what we're given, we really just have to trust Martin that there's more exciting canon in his head, because Daemon, like every character in Fire and Blood, was just a more shallow piece of world building than any true fleshed out character in the main series, for example, and that's fine. World building produces some of the most fantastic characters and situations, which can then become some of the most fantastic fleshed out stories of their own, and House of the Dragon seemed like it was on the path. Oh, they seemed like they were on the path. Season 1 was good. It showed us how to write villainous, ruthless, selfish characters as magnetic and nuanced and eventually relatable. The writing and Matt Smith's portrayal, they built atop Martin's bare-bones character to make Daemon Targaryen the highlight of the season for many viewers. What happened? They mentioned last season that they were surprised at all the love, that they had seen him as the villain. Were they angry that we loved him? Did they feel they had failed? Did they want to take some time to broaden our interest now that the conflict is blown wide open and there will be dozens of characters we need to care about all across the continent? Did they think he needed more of a struggle arc and that this was the way to do it? Were they tired of the will he, won't he tension regarding his ambitions for the throne, so they wanted to resolve them once and for all and then unresolve and resolve the other way? Did they think we were tired of this tension? Sorry, mate. Tension is sort of why we tell stories. Tension is certainly better than whatever this is. I just don't get it. Do they understand so little? I hear murmurings of politicization, that they wanted to heighten the girl power in the show, and so made both Rhaenyra and Alicent remain more involved. This seems plausible, though I prefer to avoid politics and simply evaluate the writing on its own terms. Anyway, they don't need to sideline Daemon in order to amplify Alicent or Rhaenyra, so there's nothing I can think of to that theory except that the writers are acting dumb, which we already know. But they can also act smart if they want. So what went on? Rhaenyra could have a fascinating friendship arc, a fascinating lesbian arc, could be betrayed by Daemon, and still Daemon wouldn't need this gutter garbage, this dumbing down, this tripping nonsense for, not 2 sequences, not 3, 4, but basically the entire dithering season. And the visions don't even mean anything. They don't mean anything about his journey except some weird Freudian thing that never goes anywhere, some Helena stuff, some Aemon stuff that never goes anywhere, a Viserys scene that brings back a beloved character, but really each of these only either tells us things that goes nowhere or tells us things we already know about Daemon.
I never wanted it. All that pain it caused, it crushes whoever wears it. You always wanted it, Daemon. Do you want it still?
Even with that precious character, the dialogue is greatly diminished from what makes Game of Thrones great. That it's not tropish, that the dialogue is layered, that more is said indirectly than directly. It crushes whoever wears it. This sort of line can be good, it can, but it needs to be natural, not melodramatic. It needs to be nested in particular character context.
I am the king! I will punish you.
Any man who must say, I am the king, is no true king. I'll make sure you understand that when I've won your war for you.
Crushes whoever wears it.
It crushes whoever wears it. This sort of line can be good, it can, but it needs to be natural, not melodramatic. It needs to be nested in particular character context. It's not compelling if it sounds like every other knockoff show. And the Rhaenyra revelation, I mean...
The realm's only hope is a leader who can unite it, and my brother chose you.
Okay, good to know that he was finally compelled to support Rhaenyra, not for any of the interesting Daemon-specific character reasons we had witnessed over time, but because they just injected this into his character. I guess it revives interest in him, sort of. He's just so passive, so spineless throughout the entire thing. It's confusing, inconsistent, uninteresting. And given the source material, a romance carefully engineered to be superior to the book has now been cut off at the knees. Charisma has vanished. This was a man who succeeded because men flocked to his banner. Men liked to serve under him. Everywhere he went, he collected first sellswords and second sons, yes, but then proper lords at Harrenhal. Make no mistake, in the book, Daemon was responsible for a great part of Rhaenyra's early success. She started off in an ostensibly shaky position, as the show correctly, if somewhat simplistically, portrays, but it was Daemon's quick thinking and leadership that helped her establish an early foothold. Let's read this passage from the book.
Let us turn first to Harrenhal. Though large parts of Harren's great folly were in ruins, the castle's towering curtain walls still made it as formidable a stronghold as any in the Riverlands. But Aegon the Dragon had proved it vulnerable from the sky. With its lord, Larys Strong, away in King's Landing, the castle was but lightly garrisoned. Lightly, I guess they mean like 5 dopes sitting around a table. Having no wish to suffer the fate of Black Harren, its elderly castellan Sir Simon Strong, uncle to the late Lord Lionel, great-uncle to Lord Larys, was quick to strike his banners when Caraxes lighted atop Kingspire Tower. In addition to the castle, Prince Daemon at a stroke, had captured the not inconsiderable wealth of House Strong and a dozen valuable hostages, amongst them Sir Simon and his grandsons. The castle's small folk became his captives as well, among them a wet nurse named Alice Rivers. Who was this woman? We'll get to that later. Okay. The sudden, bloodless fall of Black Harren's seat was counted a great victory for Queen Rhaenyra and her blacks. It served as a sharp reminder of the martial prowess of Prince Daemon and the power of Caraxes, the Bloodworm, and gave the queen a stronghold in the heart of Westeros, to which her supporters could rally. And Rhaenyra had many such in the lands watered by the Trident. When Prince Daemon set forth his call to arms, they rose up all along the rivers, knights and men-at-arms and humble peasants, who yet remembered the realm's delight, so beloved of her father, and the way she smiled and charmed them as she made her progress through the Riverlands in her youth. Hundreds and then thousands buckled on their sword belts and donned their mail, or grabbed a pitchfork or a hoe and a crude wooden shield, and began to make their way to Harrenhal to fight for Viserys' little girl. And then we get to a bit of difficulty. The Lords of the Trident, having more to lose, were not so quick to move, but soon enough they too began to throw their lots in with the Queen. From the twins rode Sir Forrest Frey, the very same fool Frey who had once begged for Rhaenyra's hand, now grown into a most puissant knight. Lord Samwell Blackwood, who had once lost a duel for her favour, raised her banners over Raventree. Sir Amos Bracken, who had won that duel, which they kind of swapped things around, remember? I mean, it's not clear yet if any of those characters will come back, but, well, we can talk about that later. Sir Amos Bracken, who had won that duel, followed his lord father when House Bracken declared for Aegon. The Mootons of Maidenpool, the Pipers of Pink Maiden Castle, the Roots of Harroway, the Derrys of Derry, the Mallisters of Seaguard, and the Vances of Wayfarer's Rest all announced their support for Rhaenyra. The Vances of Etrana took the other path and trumpeted their allegiance to the young king. Peter Piper, the grizzled lord of Pink Maiden, spoke for many when he said, "I swore her my sword. I'm older now, but not so old that I've forgotten the words I said, and it happens I still have the sword." Okay. So then the Lord Paramount of the Trident, Grover Tully, was an old man when he spoke for Prince Viserys, but he was no less stubborn now, even though he's failing. He had favored the rights of the male claimant, and he's not changed his views, so he insists that River Run will fight for Aegon, yet no such word goes forth. The old lord was bedridden and would not live much longer, River Run's maesters had declared. I would sooner the rest of us did not die with him, declared Sir Elmo Tully, his grandson. River Run had no defense against dragonfire, he pointed out to his own sons, and both sides in this fight rode dragons. So whilst Lord Grover thundered and fulminated from his deathbed, River Run barred its gates, manned its walls, and held its silence. So yeah, I'll talk about this more in the world building video, because it's all nested together. That's the problem here. So an incoherence and Daemon's own character arc is also reflected in this incoherence in how the politics and the armies need to work. In order to produce this compelling conflict that Martin has designed, yeah, Rhaenyra starts at a disadvantage, but she has this support. This is indeed kind of a major region of support for her. She has some supporters in the south that take a bit longer to become involved because it's farther. In the north, obviously, much longer to be involved. That's kind of calculated into their plans. And Harrenhal is a very intentional choice because of the advantage that it does offer. So you have the Trident here. This is probably generally the Riverlands. I'm actually not sure what's exactly considered the Riverlands, but here's River Run. But then you have Wayfarer's Rest, Pink Maiden. I forget all the names we read, but all of these who declared for them. Mooton's Maidenpool, Pink Maiden, Haraway, Derry, Seaguard. So then we have, just very briefly, in the Riverlands, raiders out of Raventree flying Rhaenyra's banners crossed into the lands of House Bracken, burning, driving off sheep, sacking villages, and yes, despoiling every sept they came on. So they tried to work that in. But of course, this is in the context of open war, or war already, in the book. When the Brackens gathered a strong force to strike back, Lord Samwell Blackwood surprised them on the march, taking them unawares as they camped beneath a riverside. Sir Amos Bracken, leading the host from Stonehenge, cut down and slew Lord Blackwood in a single combat, only to perish himself when a weirwood arrow found the eye slit of his helm and drove deep into his skull. Supposedly, that shaft was loosed by Lord Samwell's 16-year-old sister, Alysanne, who would later be known as Black Ally, but whether this is blah blah blah. Many other grievous losses were suffered by both sides in what became known as the Battle of the Burning Mill, and when the Brackens finally broke and fled back to their own lands, who's there? Daemon on Caraxes, a strong host made of dairies, roots, pipers, and frays, had captured the castle by storm in the absence of so much of House Bracken's strength. So we actually start off with a lot of black momentum. And then, yet it must not be thought that the Green Council was sitting idle. Sir Otto Hightower had been busy as well, winning over lords, hiring sellswords, strengthening the defenses of King's Landing, and seeking after other alliances. The fall of Harrenhal to Prince Daemon came as a great shock to his grace, Monken tells us. Until that moment, Aegon II had believed his half-sister's cause to be hopeless. Harrenhal left his grace feeling vulnerable for the first time. The subsequent defeats at the Burning Mill and Stonehenge came as further blows, and made the king realize that his situation was more perilous than it had seemed. These fears deepened as ravens returned from the Reach, where the Greens had believed themselves strongest. House Hightower and Oldtown were solidly behind King Aegon, and his grace had the Arbor too. But elsewhere in the south, other lords were declaring for Rhaenyra, amongst them Lord Costain of Three Towers, Mullendore of Uplands, Tarly of Hornhill, Rowan of Golden Grove, and Lord Grimm of Greyshield. The point is, you get the point. This is all carefully calculated by George R. R. Martin to make everything seem believable, and Daemon was a part of that, as was consistent with his character. Other blows followed. The Vale, White Harbor, Winterfell, the Blackwoods, and other riverlords streamed towards Harrenhal and Prince Daemon's banners. The Snake's fleet closed Blackwater Bay, blah 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 blah. Boom. Roasted. So Martin writes that Daemon is dashing, daring, and dangerous, but mercurial and quick to take offense. He writes that he's ambitious, impetuous, and moody, as charming as he is hot-tempered. And we saw that in Season 1. Let's do a run-through, from the opening brutality in the tournament and on the city streets, to then the hint of vulnerability at his brother's mistrust, or with Mysaria, to then the boldness of stealing the egg, the sorrow at Mysaria's abandonment, the torment over how his brother's weakness divides the realm.
You're weak, Viserys. And that Council of Leeches knows it. They all prey on you for their own ends.
Ambition and cunning in the stepstones, genuine love for battle and challenge, further designs upon Rhaenyra, seduction but left a bit ambiguous, paired with actual affection, and this was how the times were in their Targaryens, so it's a bit uncertain, then softening under Laena, fatherhood, genuine defense of his brother and his brother's wishes, strength where others are not strong, genuine affection for Rhaenyra.
I've been alone. You abandoned me.
I spared you. You were a child.
Yes. Yes, I was a child. Look at what my life became without you.
And so on and so on, and so on. So many story beats, so many changes of polarity or tension. This is how you maintain interest. Changes of polarity, let's call it. How many of those are in this season? Martin gave us dashing, daring, and dangerous, and the writers delivered. Martin gave us mercurial and quick to take offense, and the writers delivered. And now? What is this? Let's do a run-through of this season. A note, by the way, the argument between him and Rhaenyra was probably one of my favorite scenes in the entire saga, from Robert's arrival in Winterfell all the way to here. Until episode 2 and partway through episode 3, I was soaring with confidence in this new season. And then, we have Vision 1 of young Rhaenyra. Young Rhaenyra talks about Viserys. Daemon beheads her. We have Aemond and himself. Daemon and his mother. He never knew the love of a mother. Fine, okay. She tells him he should have been king. Okay. I suppose this could be seen as a reason he then makes a bid for the throne. But his bid is just cringe.
Failing that in proper fear of your Targaryen master. If you have any counsel for dealing with the River Lords, I'd be glad of it.
Daemon Targaryen asking for help?
Counsel.
Counsel.
That is pretty clever.
You should address me as my king. What would you call the husband of the queen?
Well, the king.
There it is, then.
Consort.
That last bit seems unnecessary, don't you think?
I am the king. I will punish you.
Any man who must say, I am the king, is no true king.
Cringe. It's not compelling. It's sudden, forced. The scripting is forced. There's no cleverness, no actual scheming. There's no bigger picture of people he's conspiring with, which Daemon should be capable of doing, and which he would do. There's not even any people at all, which is the main problem with the entire Harrenhal sequence. There's just nothing going on. His mother hasn't been a part of his past, hasn't been anything they've focused on. We need to resonate with things we've focused on. It shouldn't just feel like they invented it this season to fill screen time. We already have this conflicted, powerfully acted, restrainedly scripted character with all his medley of motivations, his tense silences, his shifting desires. His mother is just random, just dropped in there. What, to make his clumsy claims to the throne seem more realistic and actual? In all the visions, there's really not a single conversation that advances him in any substantive, interpersonal way. It's all just him thinking about things and then thinking, oh, I've decided to be king now because I had a sex dream in which my mother praised me. And even his talks with real characters, pretty much just Simon and Alice, struggle to feel like true Game of Thrones level dialogue.
You are not the player, but a piece on the board. As am I, for that matter.
I saw something.
The secret fire whispers to us, if we have ears to hear. It tells us things, even shows us things.
Does it show us things that will be? Or things that only might be?
Alice doesn't feel like a character. There's no real corollary for her in the originals, but we could compare her to Melisandre, I suppose.
I see a darkness in you. And in that darkness, eyes staring back at me. Brown eyes, blue eyes, green eyes.
And I mean, let's be honest, if we were to list the most interesting things about Melisandre, they would not be her character, but even if she was shown to have uncertainty and moments of weakness and desire and strange personal turns of phrase, and she's a super ancient, bizarre magic being working in the fringes of more fascinating human relationships, Alice is supposed to offer something interesting for Daemon in this time. She's pretty much the only character he plays off of, and it just falls flat for me. A minor point, but aren't accents just a bit weird when you throw them in randomly?
You do not scoff?
I'm no longer inclined to.
I'm pleased to eat it.
I don't know, maybe this is me being a bit tedious, but isn't she supposed to be from there? It makes you start to think, okay, are random Scottish accents indicative of magic because Scotland, because our real world? Every line of hers just feels like the expected line. There's this pattern in writing where a certain quirk or feature will be used because it's initially powerful, maybe because of novelty, how it captures some unique element of the world or character that the writer wants to convey. After a while, though, it becomes expected, and then it becomes dull. I originally wrote a brief spiel on this, but it ended up being a bit rambling, so I've planned on making a second video. Check below for the link. For now, I'll just say there's a trope of this figure, this magic-wise, cryptic, grinning figure in the fringes, that sort of sweeps in and makes a bunch of mysterious remarks and overwhelms the character with some nebulous wisdom. It's a trope of the mysterious, kind of nonchalant, carefree in the face of power, accented differently for some reason, wandering around the corners, answering questions with questions.
My hands would just be waving in the air. I mean, how do I get from here to there?
How did you get to reattach severed nerves and put a human spine back together, bone by bone?
Study and practice, years of it.
Making statements nebulous or cryptic when they don't need to be.
I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. Being the one is just like being in love. No one can tell you you're in love, you just know it.
Making weird allusions and metaphors.
For the night is dark and full of terrors.
Because if the writers commit to anything too direct or grounded, it might sound stupid, or you might realize you're watching an actual fantasy show about magic, and you might just find yourself a bit less willing to believe it.
The Midichlorians are a microscopic life form that resides within all living cells.
Remove her gag.
Shut up.
For those of you just listening, Lady Jessica signs to Paul, find the right pitch. You see how this gets tricky any time we bring in some of the hazier, more mystical types of magic into a world. You know, compared to, say, a Sandersonian type of magic where it's very mathematical. You drink this much metal, it gives you this much ability that you burn at this rate. They make a science of it. This is a more modern sort of world building. But if you compare, if you look at Tolkien, you know, or some of the more nebulous magic in Game of Thrones, which is actually most of it. You know, magic is fairly minimal in Game of Thrones, but the magic that exists so far, you just know very little about. It becomes difficult to kind of methodize or write into an actual character and journey, something that requires sacrifice and growth in kind of a logistical way. Just like anything they do, you can only have so many force push battles where they're just sitting there straining and then they fly apart, or whoever has the stronger will wins. Or in, say, Aragon or any sort of fantasy series in which you have a battle of wills where the characters just stand there straining. You know, how do you portray that on screen? The characters stand there straining and then one starts bleeding from the nose and then, you know, he dies. You have to build this into character, and if you can't connect the battle of wills or the battle of magic to some character journey of, you know, how strongly does he want to sacrifice himself, how desperate is he to rescue the woman, whatever, you know, some belief in a lie or truth, a deception. If you can't connect it to these things, then it's just always going to feel a little bit stilted to make concrete.
When you came here, you were a closed fist. You wished to bend the world to your will. But you've discovered, I think, that this world will not be governed.
So this is a trope, and we've gotten tired of it, and we feel like we can predict every line of hers because we can. And she has no apparent vulnerability. She just kind of tosses him about without need. For some reason, he doesn't confront her more violently or run away or take some sort of action, as is very much his style. Instead, he just kind of bumbles and staggers his way around over and over and over again. Also, it doesn't all have to be just because we've gotten tired of this trope. It's also somewhat poorly done. Some tropes can be done well, even now in this time of troubling oversaturation. So another thing I mentioned in the separate video on this is when a certain device is tropified, it starts getting copied not only just too much, but also by people who don't have the skill or understanding to use it correctly. So there are ways Tolkien's more archaic, flowery style can be used to good effect, and ways that it cannot be used to good effect.
If we move swiftly, we may be able to crush 2 spiders with 1 boot.
Rings of Power isn't just copying the trope and we all happen to be tired of it. Rings of Power is doing it very, 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 very badly.
You've always said sandstone in your granite.
Another example, everyone started using italics to represent internal dialogue in a character's head, monologue. It's cool. Then it gets overused and some people tend to back away from it again, so it feels less plastic or directly author speaking to the reader-ish. Then young wannabe writers read it and like it because they're connecting with the character, so they use it way too much and poorly, so they just exposit to the reader the entire conversations of thought, and it starts to feel horrible, so skilled writers shift away from italics completely, and so on and so on, in continuous evolution, and it's impossible to say exactly which tools are good and bad because they'll always be used by writers of different caliber and resonate in different ways for different audiences, blah blah blah. But in this case, in the case of Alice and this utterly impotent Harrenhal, it just feels dumb. It feels like all the uninteresting elements of the enigmatic Scottish witch trope, and none of the interesting elements. It feels really like the entire sequence was just him tripping, both literally and figuratively, in bed or at the table, being woken up again and again by Simon Strong, and nothing else at all got done.
To how loathsome I may find her representative, the Prince.
King.
Any man who must say, I am the king, is no true king.
Next point, the entire castle is made too pitiful. It looks entirely unlivable. Like, yeah, the book says it's damp and stone is melted and crumbling in places, but it's also huge. It's supposed to be a tactical foothold in the Riverlands. It's supposed to control some wealth. It would have a household. It would have surrounding town and market and farms. They would have a roof above the beds and table. They would have kitchens, fireplaces lit with fires. It's all just a bit absurd. Like, there's no advantage whatsoever shown in going there in the show. In the book, they make it very clear it offers security. It's an ideal staging area for a large force, which he does muster quickly in the book, and that's the entire point. If it was so useless as this, better to go to the keep of Grover Tully and cow him into fealty with Dragonflame, which is what Daemon does in the book, whenever he needs to, and it works across the Riverlands. He doesn't just sit around. Given Daemon's standing and ambition, and given the whole political landscape we see people functioning in all across the world, there's just no reason to think he wouldn't muster one of the quicker, more savage armies as he does in the book. This season felt entirely like a stopping device to slow him down, like timbers thrown in the way of a freight train. Next point, you can't develop a character entirely through dreams. This is like the most unskilled narrative device. I see people analyzing the dreams, questioning the meaning of each one. Some of them are echoes of past moments, but slightly more regretful or tender, slightly more wise or hesitant, hints of selflessness. Some of them are complete fabrications. Oh, his relationship with his mother, his desire for the throne. Some of them are a mix. Oh, his violent treatment of his problems, his rejection of vulnerability and closeness, his bloodiness and the pretense that it does not weigh on him. It's like they just jump through an entire character sketch or outline without having him actually live the story. It's like making a show entirely of flashbacks, just jumping around to construct the most pointed, artless blow-by-blow of what you think a character represents. Except flashbacks at least actually happen, so they're constrained by some level of believable backstory. This is just pure symbolism. Might as well paint 6 paintings and call them Daemon's Journey. I do like dreams. They can be cool, but they have to be used with restraint. To me, this just feels somewhat juvenile, like the first 3 novels of Wheel of Time level exposition. It just got boring because he was doing nothing else the whole season, and everything he did made very little sense and was just doddering and weak. It was not the Daemon we knew. And he's supposed to have unique power against Alice Rivers. Were they afraid that would continue to make him too popular? Heaven forbid audiences like a character in this show. Isn't that one of the main complaints, criticisms? No one's likable and all of them are kind of grim and bitter compared to Game of Thrones, where you have Arya, Jon and his friends, Robb and his lover, Tyrion and Bronn and Podrick and all their attendant laughs, Brienne and Jaime. We liked very many of the characters in Game of Thrones. And Daemon was a rare one here, because House of the Dragon is grim overall. It's entirely about this war and death and friendships broken, and more of the characters are tired and bitter and backstabby from the very get-go. Now, it's fine to have other powerful players in his life. It's fine to have something for him to contend with in Harrenhal. Just don't make it unconvincing and tropish and last for the entire season. Yes, Alice is supposed to be this mysterious figure with some strange powers of import. I'm glad they didn't go with Maester Eustace's thing, for example, and make her a simple-minded slattern. It's good they built her up in some way towards her eventual conclusion. But Daemon, of all people, is supposed to stand against her charms. That's part of his Targaryenness. The idea to have his bed of weirwood affecting him isn't a bad idea. The idea to make him dream-connected in some way isn't a bad idea, though they've already done that both with Viserys and Helaena to make them more interesting. And if you're going to make him a dreamer, don't make it the only thing. Daemon was already interesting. George's characters are most interesting as characters. Daemon was interesting for his actual relationship to Viserys, his actual desire for the throne, his actual affection for Mysaria, in tension with his ambition, in tension with his charisma and his understanding of men, in tension with his pure waywardness and bloodthirstiness, in tension with yet hints of fatherliness, in tension with his desire for freedom, his studiousness, his fascination for the old ways, giving him that specific Targaryen edge. We saw all these things and they made Daemon. We saw them play out in arcs, this dance of story that requires other characters also stepping out their steps, and they're all interconnected. This was always Martin's strength, and it's always weakest when they just use visions as this dumb crutch in total isolation. Remember Bran's storyline, yeah? Remember how interesting that was?
And who has a better story than Bran the Broken?
Every single one of them. And not just the men, but the women. And the children, too.
All too often, dreams are just used as devices to say, these are his emotions. What do you think that reveals about him? Well, you'll never know because it won't reveal anything about him because he won't be doing anything or do anything. He'll just be a boiling pot of formless emotion water poured wherever we need the story to go. The point is, if you want to fate a Westerosi character, you can. Spool out your thread and bind him to the Moirai, make the demons whisper in his ear, turn the world on its head, give him a glimpse of every branching possibility. Fine, but do it too much, or make him too weak to do anything else, and you've destroyed the entire substance of his character. When I zoom out, I feel anger, but as the season progressed, I just felt growing apathy. At first it was interesting. Oh, he's having a vision of a woman. Oh, it's young Rhaenyra. Wow, that's meaningful because it was before all this new bitterness and weariness, before all the machinations for the crown, back when she was pure and free, the realm's delight, the Rhaenyra of Dragonback who looked up to Daemon for his gallivanting freedom, his devil-may-care honesty, his fondness unattached, unburdened by the same sort of demanding judgment that accompanied her father's affection. Wow, this is kind of a meaningful vision. And with it, resurface all those questions. Was it because she was young and easily manipulated? Did he like her truly? What of her feelings for him? Were they simply a reaction to her father's stiffness, or did she see something in him which could nearly have borne fruit? They've just had this fearsome fight. They truly do feel for one another. She wants to trust him. She aches for support. He aches for acceptance, recognition of his greatness. He aches to contribute to something glorious, but is it the realm's glory? Or is it his own? Does he actually have the capacity for glory, or does he only yearn to be seen as glorious? And then I saw, oh wow, she's sewing the head of dead Jaehaerys. That's symbolic. It's like they have children together, she has motherly instincts, maybe he could be a good father as he seems to have somewhat been to produce such agreeability in Baela and Rhaena. Wow, there's this scene of warmth and domestic contentment. We never got to see this between them, but of course we never got to see it because of the throne and its nature, and Rhaenyra's relationship with the throne, and with her father, and Daemon's, and his savage nature, and his relationship with them all. Of course we never got to see it. And just how guilty should he be for Jaehaerys' death? And how terrible or not terrible does he feel about it? And would he have had a better chance for domestic bliss with Rhaenyra if he were the sort of man who felt terrible about Jaehaerys' death? So I see that first vision and all those thoughts arise. This could be interesting. It's not quite like the book, because in the book he was impervious to Alice Rivers, and this is an entire part of his charm and power as a ruthless Targaryen prince, as Martin's Black Prince, as the man who sings in ancient tongues to dragons in their stony lairs. So anyway, I see the first vision, and I think all of these things. Then the next one, in episode 4, he meets young Rhaenyra. She talks about how Viserys loved her more than he loved Daemon. Daemon is wounded, stricken by this. He beheads her. This is okay. He doesn't talk about his problems. He kills them. Very good. He doesn't confront the truth. He kills its messenger. This is possibly a good direction. He's continuing to be affected by Alice Rivers. They're kind of weakening him, but it's still kind of interesting. Not much time has passed. The others haven't witnessed his vulnerability too much. This is an interesting character beat. Surely he'll do something now.
What would you call the husband of the queen?
Well, the king.
There it is then.
Consort.
That's clever.
Okay, moving on from that, we see Aemond and himself, and they're like kind of the same, rivals. Wow, never picked up on that. Then we see Viserys on the throne, mourning Aemma.
Did you say it? The heir for a day.
You cut the image of the conqueror, brother.
Did you say it?
I don't know what you mean.
You will address me as your grace, or I will have my Kingsguard cut out your tongue.
Kind of revamps the old scene with slight tweakings, very brief, very unstimulating dialogue in terms of new character motivations or choices.
Did you say it?
You can't possibly still be angry about this.
My family has just been destroyed. My family was just destroyed. But instead of being by my side or Rhaenyra's, you chose to celebrate your own rise! Laughing at me. Laughing with the whores and lick spittles.
No,
It's very brief, very unstimulating dialogue in terms of new character motivations or choices, because you can't choose things in dreams, guys. But hey, it's Viserys. That's pretty cool. He was a great character. Ah, for the days of character development, nuanced relationships in which characters felt intensely for one another.
You never think of your father. His forbearance, his dignity.
Oh, I think of him all the time, Otto, my boy. The throne room, the entrance, the tension he could maintain, the drama, with 15 seconds of silent walking, hobbling.
If I am to grace this fast with some answer, I will start by reminding the court that nearly 20 years ago in this fable,
King Viserys of House Targaryen, the first of his name, King of the Andals, and the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, and Protector of the Realm.
I'm sorry, I want to amend that. I said 15 seconds because I didn't want to exaggerate, but then I went back to actually check, and he starts walking at second 22 of the minute, and he finishes at second 40 of the next minute. That's, 80 seconds of tension, drama, powerful, with no dialogue. Then he stops and he tells Otto,
I will sit the throne today.
And then he still has to go farther. He still has to have Daemon help him. There's so much drama packed into the scene because they've built it. They've built it up and earned it in, not too many episodes of television compared to now where we are with season 2, twice as many episodes. And it's because he has these characters around him that he's been interacting with. I'm going to talk about this with my sister soon, probably on a podcast, Characterization, and how the biggest problem with speculative fiction, sci-fi, fantasy, kind of these popular genres we started out with and which we love greatly, the biggest problem that tends to afflict them is a lack of understanding as to character or what an audience truly resonates with. The most successful sagas in these will always be the character-rich sagas. Okay, perhaps not always. There's other creative aspects, Sanderson and his world building, for example, but he has great characters. But there's this problem. And then this is why in other genres or whatever of literature, like high literature or whatever, the Steinbeck, the Fitzgerald, why they tend to look down on fantasy or be skeptical that it could ever attain the same level. Because there's simply less of a focus across the board in fantasy. There's simply less of an understanding of characterization and what really makes us tick. Oh, I'm actually also making a video on this pretty soon here, so subscribe, comment, like. It really helps so much. But the point is, one of the features of fantasy that tends to harm it in this area is characters are often traveling, often, trying to recruit new. There's this trope. My sister and I, we've worked as ghostwriters for quite a while now. And, and we started out writing our own stories when we were very young. And we've noticed all across the board, there's this tendency with aspiring fantasy writers to do this thing where you just have some sort of battle or catalyst for the conflict. The first book will be more of like the farm boy goes out into the wild and gets exposed, or the world rather, and gets exposed to the conflict. And it's like the beginning of this coming of age or chosen one type thing. And then there's just a council, and then they all scatter across the world to recruit the various races. And you get to explore the different races. And, it's probably modeled in some way after, the Council of Elrond and a bunch of other tropes or whatever that we would have seen in past works. But it ends up where none of the characters are around other characters they care about, and you're constantly having to introduce new political scenarios, and newer writers aren't even particularly good at introducing political scenarios, but you're constantly having to introduce new characters and convince the reader to be as invested in them as the characters you've been with the whole while, because the characters you've been with the whole while are no longer interacting. And this is impossible, and this is why a lot of fantasy falls flat. If a writer doesn't know what else to do, they'll just focus on the world building and expansion, recruiting, councils, and there's no relationship. One of the reasons Game of Thrones is so successful is you have this multi-generational drama, and you have these characters that are around each other all the time, and he just correctly observes that so much of what goes on in humanity is not traveling and covering ground to a new city, but it's occurring, in this same court with characters talking. And this is much more similar to the sort of, sophisticated literature that typically sneers at fantasy. This is much more similar to, the dramatic works of Steinbeck or whatever that are well crafted because he has an understanding of humanity. And part of it might be tricky because they do have to go around and do this war thing. And you just look at season 1 logistically and it's like, okay, all the characters were in the same place. And you have Alicent and Otto, and then boom, the children bring their own layer of drama, of course. And then, all the slightly more minor players, but still people, the Strongs and Criston Cole and all that, the Velaryons, Larys, everyone with their own array of motivations, and they're all playing off one another. I mean, this is why the small councils were always some of the best in Game of Thrones. It's because it's the writing and the characters, and this is what audiences resonate with.
You bore me. You all bore me.
So yeah, maybe logistically this season's a bit more tricky. I mean, you have to bring in all this stuff with blockades and population starving commoners and sieges and, battles, and they have to cross ground when nothing really happens. They have to cross the continent and have this one battle where something does happen, so you have to have a different sense of timing. But the first season had a lot of time jumps, and they managed to balance it and make it feel compelling. So yeah, they're just not doing as good a job. Remember these? Remember the throne room? Remember the dinner? The single trembling motion of taking off his mask and then letting his hand collapse weakly to the table, the clatter of the mask, the deformity of his face. The tremulous anger of a weakening man.
If not for the sake of the crown, and for the sake of this old man, who loves you all.
The sorrow, the burden, the desire for a daughter, the desire for a legacy, the desire to be tested.
Strong. Is it not better to live in peace than to have songs sung after you are dead?
Perhaps. There is a part of me wishes I'd been tested.
Okay, editor Jesse checking out. Back to the main video.
You never think of your father.
Ah, for the days of character development, nuanced relationships in which characters felt intensely for one another, in which their actions were informed by the ongoing tensions of their relationships, where each character was suspended at the center of a spiderweb of conflicting motivations, pulled every which way by so many strings of other characters they cared about, characters they had backstory with, conflicting interests with. We see some of that with Alicent and her sons, with Larys and Aegon, but those scenes are more poorly scripted than they ought to be, and unfortunately kind of redundant after a certain point. This makes sense because so much of what we're doing after Aegon's fall is just treading water, waiting for armies to be summoned and the war to continue to not start, I guess. In the book, Alicent has very little to do after giving birth, very unlike Cersei or Catelyn Stark and their ilk. So I'm glad they continue to deepen these characters by playing on the mother-son relationships and her tension with Criston Cole and all of that. There was, and is, potential there, but nothing really changed. She dismissed Aegon, prompted him to fly to battle, and that was episode 4. Then it's just a few tense scenes with Aemond, malicious, looming over him. The most interesting scenes are with Larys, of course, but not much changes. Then if we look elsewhere across Westeros, no one of interest is with anyone else of interest. This is key. They're all alone. And those we sort of care about, like Jace or Baela, Corlys, they're all having dumb, cookie-cutter conversations, prolonging the nothingness until the final episode, which ends again with a kind of nothing.
And you're but one part in it. You know your part.
Who does Rhaenyra feel intensely for on Dragonstone? Her son they've reduced to a shadow of his glory in the books, some dour, sniveling guy who stands around looking beautiful with pinched lips and luscious locks, sneers at commoners, grovels for his mother's favor, and shows none of the cunning and charisma he showed in the books. It's sad. Eventually, partway through episode 4 or the beginning of episode 5 or something like that, I'm thinking, not a real fan of the Harrenhal arc. Daemon's barely shown, and when he's shown, he's just tripping out and otherwise doing nothing. He's Peasley and ineffective before the court. He's mustering no troops. Most of the scenes are like this one continuous trip, and it feels like they want us to just shrug and say, wow, Alice Rivers is so mysterious, always gliding around and watching meaningfully from the side, always making cryptic statements in her wildly out-of-place accent. Surely her words must be wise. Surely the cryptic statements mean things. Keep in mind that in the books for this entire time, the entire land has sprung up in a patchwork of warring nobles. There are lords who remember their oaths, who raise banners for Rhaenyra. Rhaenyra is not this hopeless, isolated thing on Dragonstone, and Daemon is not this wide-eyed, flailing whatever in Harrenhal. He takes the fortress, raises an army with the speed that frightens the Greens. The Riverlands are ablaze. Armies in the south begin to march for either side. The blockade has a more immediate presence. I mean, they've mentioned it, which is nice, and the starving King's Landing, but I feel like we should have seen more of the Velaryons as the second most, at times the most powerful house in the realm. Casterly Rock is far, Old Town is far, the Riverlands are close. And this must be imprinted on the audience. This is why Daemon comes to Harrenhal. And now what? What, we're left with nothing but tripping out on weirwood fumes and no actions whatsoever except lines like this?
All your life you've sought to command your own fate. But today you are ready.
You'll find your true staff only when the vision of your heart is single to the service of the secret fire.
So I've spoken a lot about Daemon, maybe too much. By way of a brief outline to help veil my rambling and convince you this has been a coherent presentation, we have thus far covered. You cannot develop a character through dreams. He doesn't do anything else. No characters are with people they care about. Now we get to the quality of the scripting and line delivery this season, which is to me most obvious in Daemon's arc.
When you came here, you were a closed fist. You wish to bend the world to your will. But you've discovered, I think, that this world will not be governed.
Really? That's like Lord of the Rings, or like bad Lord of the Rings. It works sometimes in Game of Thrones when delivered by a skilled actor in balance.
When you play the Game of Thrones, you win, or you die.
But much of the time it does not work because this is not that sort of story. These are rich and raw characters who sneer and laugh and curse and make little weird hand gestures and all the other delights of a politically and historically rigorous story, a realistic human story, not some archaic fantasy. These are not archetypal characters as Paul Atreides or Sauron or Galadriel. These are real people. That's why we resonate with them, and they should talk like it. So the less character quirk or particularity you inject into a bit of dialogue, the more tropish or general it starts to seem. It starts to feel like, oh yeah, this is familiar sort of vehicle for conveying this familiar sort of story beat. These are not people unto themselves, they're kind of stand-ins for the idea of the treacherous uncle. What happens if you inject quirk and individuality is you believe the character is in that moment, and then you kind of get the chills when you realize also that deeper layer his words bring. It's like, yes, that's right, because that is a real believable person that I've followed until now, and in living this real believable journey, he has stumbled across this more universal archetypal truth that we always talk about. And so his words ring just so, because this is the sort of situation from which prophecies actually might come. This is why the tropes are tropes, because they're a distilled version of what he's living out and what I've lived out here and here and here.
Give me Rhaenyra to take to wife, and we will return the House of the Dragon to its proper glory.
Of course. It's not my daughter you lust for, is it? It's my throne.
You did not lose it, you gave it away. Because you thought ever and only of your own glory, and not of my father in his grief.
Your father was a coward
you.
who knew I was the stronger son, that I was the leader of men, and he was afraid to be seen in my shadow.
They are unyielding in battle. But every man has a weakness.
You take my meaning, then.
Every man has a weakness, and their weakness is having villages and wives? Was this always a possibility? Are the Blackwoods able and happy to do it to the Brackens, but for some reason the Brackens can't do it to them? Do you know how to muster an army? Do you know how oaths work? Do you know that you just can't tell House Blackwood to rape and pillage the Brackens and expect that no one will know it was you, yet want them to know it was you to bend the knee, yet not really? And yeah, social accountability and oaths and trust don't matter at all in feudal society. They're not like the entire thing it's built upon. Mamma mia.
Oh, the king.
There it is, then.
Consort.
That last bit seems unnecessary, don't you think?
What a clever guy. What a tactician. That's the Daemon we've always known. In this leaking hovel of a fortress, where in the books he had already mustered an army in Rhaenyra's name.
When I take King's Landing, Rhaenyra is welcome to join me there and take her place by my side. King and Queen.
Well, all out in the open, I guess. No more doubt. Oh, he switches by the end. Okay, well, that was an eventful character arc. I'm glad he interacted with so many other characters and planted so many seeds for future relational tension during this switcheroo he pulled.
See, I must begin here with a lesson in etiquette. Or failing that, in proper fear of your Targaryen master. Is there some reason you feel free to wake a king in his bed?
They would not wake Daemon in the middle of his sleep. Sorry. Again, just making him weak.
Daemon Targaryen asking for help?
Counsel.
Again, weak. This isn't how he speaks.
No matter how loathsome I may find her representative, the prince.
King.
Again, Weak. Not like him. He's not some child affirming his weakness rather than seizing the strength he could along some other line. It's just wrong. Fine if you want to give him that arc, but do it in a way that nests with the rest of the world and everything. Fine if you want to make Oscar a powerful young lad, even set him against Daemon. It can be interesting, but do so while maintaining Daemon's true character. This is absurd. Children say that. Joffrey says that. Daemon Targaryen does not say that. To say that is to grant Oscar his little game. So the idea is they want to fight for Rhaenyra because of a loyalty they feel, which we never really see or interact with.
Your Lord Oscar is bold, but he is perhaps not wrong. I may have been a touch enthusiastic in pursuing my aims, but don't allow my failings to keep you from supporting an upright man.
This is just so forced. I could probably do a more detailed dissection maybe if people are interested, but it's just so constructed. Each line follows from the next. I'd have to go into how the characters ought to really work, which is hard to argue because we're not given much about their individual characters, so we just have to prattle on about medieval politics and, Daemon commanded this, they're wanting to serve Daemon, but only in order to serve Rhaenyra because they really despise Daemon, yet they'll bow to him if he subjects himself to Oscar, and he'll do that by killing Blackwood because Blackwood shouldn't have obeyed Daemon, but Daemon was okay to order it because he can claim base desires, so Daemon can denounce his crimes and dispense justice, or they just want to make a sham of it so that they can really follow Rhaenyra like they want to anyway. So to be clear, the writing can decline in terms of character arc and world building or political sense, but each of those things can be separate from the actual scripting itself of dialogue. Let's take a step back and look at what makes a Martin character tick, and why their lines are so compelling. Martin is famed for what I will call his character diversity, complexity. Most of them are traumatized in interesting ways. They have elements of moral gray, with the capacity to be anti-heroes, villains, or heroes, depending on the situation or the point of view. They have multifaceted relationships, tensions pulling them many different ways. They are, in a word, real, and that makes them compelling. Of course things are dramatized somewhat, it wouldn't be a story if they weren't, and of course there's loads more to Martin's great success, like his world building, his grasp of politics, religion, the little beautiful touches of magic in the fringes, but so much of it, in the end, boils down to his grasp of what it is to be a human, of the entire tapestry of it, from the deep abyss of cowardice and greed to the highest pinnacle of love and sacrifice. So we've established already that it's ridiculous what they've done with Daemon's character. No emotional entanglement, no charisma, none of the nuance they labored to build atop the book.
We march on King's Landing and take the throne.
The throne?
It's a big chair, made of swords.
Those visions utterly diminished him, and who's left? We don't empathize with Mysaria much, and we shouldn't, if she's just going to steal from other characters. I'd venture to say we don't resonate all that much with Rhaenyra even. I think the actor's skilled, but the character is just the same flat, weary bitterness all season. She hit her high in that episode 2 fight, and then it's been just nonsense from there. The occasional glimmer of tears in the eye, an absolutely nonsensical red sewing, stealing Jace's every idea and relegating him further to the shadows, one steamy kiss out of the blue, and now...
How did it come to this?
Aegon
and Daemon were the most interesting characters going into this season.
Traitors! Villains! They dare strike at me!
Grace.
I am the king!
Yes.
I am the king!
With some potential for Jace, Baela, obviously Otto, and Aemond if he can continue some vulnerability. The prostitute scenes, for example, they were so long ago now. Where's that Aemond? The Aemond that does more than just stare and ride a dragon and deliver intimidating lines to all and sundry. Now with whom are we left to resonate? With whom? Woe and betide.
How the mighty have fallen.
And then they try to jump Daemon back to relevance at the very end with his final vision and his bowing and his speech. Sorry, it's too late for me. I thought at least you might use my disinterest to father interest in another character, Jace or Baela or Rhaena or anyone we hadn't known, but no, not at all. Each of them was boring. Each of them did nothing. Why do the first 3 episodes hold basically all my memories for the season? When you think of peak House of the Dragon moments, I think of the following. The bookend bridge scenes between Daemon and Rhaenyra, Season 1 and Season 1. The throne room with Daemon and his brother. Heir for a Day, Did You Say It, Season 1. Although they did try a cheap callback there because they had nothing to offer in its place. The Driftwood Crown.
Added to the chair.
Season 1. The Wedding in all its bold politicking season 1. The children and bright-eyed dashing Harwin, various scenes through season 1. I think of Daemon teaching his children, a turning point, a tenderness with Laena, High Valyrian, the warmth of Pentos, of lamplight, of embroidered cloth. I think of Rhaenyra walking to the throne with her newborn, raging, pained, the blossoming of hatred.
Do keep trying, Selena. Sooner or later you may get one who looks like you.
I think of the funeral of Laena and all the silent politics.
Sorry for your loss, my prince.
No matter how fat the leech grows, it always wants for another meal.
Season 1, kind of reminiscent of the Light of the Seven sequence. I think of the claiming of Vhagar, the fight, the eye.
She was mine to claim. Then you should have claimed her. Maybe your cousins can find you a pig to ride.
Shivers at that scene, the politics of children when bad parenting and lack of supervision and lifelong enmity becomes involved. Now that's interesting because that's something in medieval times that we're quite divorced from in our current meta. I think of Viserys on the Iron Throne one last time. Vaemond, Daemon, ruthlessness, assertiveness, the man who dares to climb the ladder.
Say it.
The family dinner.
Each of them handsome, wise, strong.
Vaemond.
Come.
So many scenes. Season 1, Season 1, Season 1. Aegon's coronation, Rhaenyra's coronation, the lighting of the table, Rhaenys and Meleys, and of course Luke's death. So many scenes in Season 1. And truly in this season, there's almost nothing story-centric that I care about after the fall of Sunfire in Episode 4, and even that is doubtful. Note that when I say story-centric, I mean something related to character development, interpersonal choices and motivations. Rhaenys' death, while moving and well done, was not a story-centric thing in this sense. It was just a plot beat. Really, most of the scenes are in the first 3 or even 2 episodes. I actually somewhat liked Rhaenyra and Alicent in the Sept, which I know can be a heretical opinion in some book circles, but I think the characters do need to be sanitized somewhat. They need to be made sympathetic, given another layer of friendship, tension to egg them on. I also think it's realistic that Rhaenyra would speak of the dream, that Alicent would react jealously, and that things might spiral. Things are set already in their course. Dragons have flown and men have fought, and it's too late. But please, please, don't then keep them in the same state of nothingness for the entire season, because after that moment, I can think of almost nothing. Corlys and Baela was a brief glimmer of fresh relationship, set up for Alan, Baela flying Moondancer for the scouting. Oh, Kristen Cole and Hightower, good chemistry, good conflict, good scripting.
That is a bleak philosophy.
I have no philosophy. Or rather, my philosophy was this: to protect the righteous and dispense justice on the rest. But now, you saw what I saw. The dragons dance, and men are like dust under their feet.
Definitely some highlights, but I'm absolutely confident they cut most or several scenes for them. As others are saying, it definitely does feel like a 10-episode season cut for some reason down to 8. That final scene with Kristen, out of the blue, that was one of the only ones that sticks in my mind from the entire second half. Good writing, good emotion, good multi-layered understanding. Each line means multiple things, yet resentment between the two of them. Two men of very different lots in life, at odds on how to lead, yet recognizing that they share a certain loneliness and a zeal for their duty. Good. But the rest of it, what scenes even come to mind? Daemon finally giving that speech? Aemond and Aegon having a couple moments together? Certainly Aegon's speech about his wounds, that's a highlight.
And remain until what is coming has passed.
You want to take me to Essos, to live with the goat fuckers.
It's best to live, I think. However you do it.
Is it? My dragon is dead. I am burnt and disgusting and alone.
But that's unsurprising. Aegon has been brilliant from day one. He's a good character, but he's crippled. He's out of the picture for so much of what's going on. No other scenes come to mind. That's bad. That's like 12 or 20 memorable scenes from season 1 against how many? 3 in this season? Rhaenyra and Daemon, Aegon and Otto, Aemond in the brothel, Aegon and Aemond in the brothel. See, you're reaching already for less important scenes. Aegon doing certain things with good acting. What true, changeful, character-building scenes were there to upset the momentum, to turn our expectations, to deepen our idea of a character? Yeah, not good.